Welcome everyone to the EchoPod. Thank you for tuning in to our first episode after our intro episode of Breaking Taboos, Stories of Resilience, to show where we celebrate the incredible stories within our community. I'm one of your co-hosts, Quincel, and our other co-host,
Angie,
and today's episode is extra special because we have one of our own community members stepping into the spotlight to share their remarkable journey with all of us today. So
Yeah.
could you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Hi everybody, my name is Tawna Pitts. I am a Stockton native and I am a recovering addict recovering from active substance abuse. I come from an environment and a family line that has been generationally affected by this disease and misinformation, and I've come today to share my journey through to the other side and how I've overcome some of the barriers and how I've been able to sustain recovery and get out of active addiction.
So could you tell us a little bit how you started using and what was going on in your life when you started using?
So, what I've been able to find out in hindsight in my journey is I come from an environment that was generationally affected by this disease. And what I've come to understand is my belief systems, my perception, the way I process information was all laid by individuals in my environment, um, such as my parents and my family members who were affected by the disease of addiction. So the pre-programming that I had was all laid by the disease of addiction. So I come from a space where misinformation and dysfunction were a way of life. The disease of addiction, everybody around me was using substances in some way or another. And coming from an environment where I was not able to be nourished emotionally and physically, it was almost inevitable that when I got to a certain age in puberty, around 15 years old, I used my first substance, and the pre-programming was already there. So it's generational. So the odds of me being an addict, like once I use the substance, because not everybody who uses substances become addicts, but because of the lineage and the environment that I came from, the pre-programming made me super susceptible to becoming an addict. So when I picked up my first substance, it totally took over. And what I've learned is that the substance use became my coping mechanisms, because coming from an environment I was not instilled with the natural progression of emotional intelligence or emotional maturity. So when I used substances, it changed my reality and it became my coping mechanisms, because I don't come from an environment where healthy coping mechanisms existed. So as soon as I found substances, that became the way that I dealt with emotions, how I dealt with my reality, how I dealt with the things at home, how I dealt with social pressures. So I started using substances when I was 15 years old.
and if you don't mind me asking, how long were you active in your addiction?
So from the age of 15 years old, on January 25th, 2024, I will have 2 years continuous clean time. So I used from the age of 15 until about 2 years ago. So, and I'm 38 now. So I used for over 20 something years.
Oh, that's been like a really long journey then.
It really has. My drugs of choice have changed over time. Finding ways and means to get more, and there's just a natural progression of the disease of addiction. My gateway drug was cigarettes, nicotine, and
In the beginning.
in the beginning at 15, I picked up cigarettes, and then within 2 weeks, I was willing to try anything that I could
That
get
you can get
that I
hands
can
on.
get my hands on. Yeah.
And then I know right now the climate of the opiate epidemic, fentanyl has been on the rise.
Right.
And do you have any knowledge of like
So I
that
do
going
have
on?
experience with fentanyl over the years of my disease progression, when I was 33 years old, actually when I was 23 years old, I had an injury and I was prescribed hydrocodone. And we were going on a trip to the water. This is how I got introduced to opiates. We're going on a trip to the water, and in my mind I said, I don't want to take this whole bottle of pills with me, so I'll just take 2 pills. And I took 2 pills, and on the ride up there, I was feeling the symptoms of the opiates, and because I was already programmed for the disease of addiction, I was already active on the inside. When my mind aligned that the reason I was feeling what I was feeling was because of the pills, by the time I got home, the whole pill bottle was gone that night. Wow. So I accidentally got high on opiates for the first time, and then I instantly went into full-blown use of opiates. It was my introduction to opiates, and after that, the natural progression, after about a year and a half of using hydrocodone, codeine syrup, oxycodone, I was buying pills off the streets. The natural progression led me to heroin. And so after heroin, I was using heroin and for about a year, and I bought some pills from somebody on the streets thinking that they were oxycodone, and they had actually given me fentanyl. So in 2019, unknowingly, I OD'd on fentanyl, and they were able to revive me and bring me back with the Narcan. Thankfully, there was somebody there around me who called 911. It took several things of Narcan to bring me back, but so I accidentally OD'd on fentanyl and heroin, thinking it was something else.
Wow. And they revived you back on scene, or did you have to go to the emergency?
They revived me back on scene, but I woke up coming through the doors of the emergency
room.
And
do you recall like how you felt after?
I'm gonna be honest. So like I say, I come from a place of misinformation. I've always been a very wholesome woman with good values, and I've been kind of naive to the hard drug scene, because for the beginning part of my addiction, it was prescription drugs. And when I started using the hard drugs, I didn't really have anybody that I was using with, so I didn't even know I was capable of ODing. So you would have to imagine when I OD'd how much of a shock it was to me. I remember coming through the doors of the hospital, and I didn't know what had happened. And then I remembered, I said, oh my God, did I OD? And the paramedics was like, yes, you OD'd. And I remember feeling so scared. I remember feeling so defeated. I remember feeling like just terrified, because I had never seen anybody OD. I was very new to the actual heroin, the natural, just heroin. I was used to taking pills, and I had never OD'd before. So it was really, really scary to me. I got clean right as the fentanyl pandemic was really taking off. I never consciously used fentanyl. I consciously used opiate derivatives and heroin, but I never consciously used fentanyl. So you can imagine that when I found out that I had OD'd off fentanyl and how I had acquired it, how shocked I was. Thankfully, the universe, my higher power, seemed fit to get me clean as the fentanyl pandemic was really starting to boom. Because if it had that effect on me with just one use, I could imagine if I would have stayed in active addiction, what could have possibly happened.
Yeah, oftentimes some of us are involved in the San Joaquin County Opiate Safety Coalition, and some of the providers have told us that within this county, a lot of substances such as marijuana or even like other classes of drugs that are prescribed are being laced with fentanyl. So there's people dying left and right, and our community members are not aware of what's in these substances. So
I'm gonna be
I wanted
honest.
to raise awareness about that.
So I wasn't just an opiate user or a an opiate user. I also was using crystal meth, and I remember after having the OD off of the fentanyl, still not being able to get clean, still bouncing in and out, trying to find recovery. And I remember a close friend of mine using crystal meth and end up ODing off of fentanyl, not knowing that the crystal meth was laced with fentanyl, and she didn't make it. She ended up actually dying from the overdose. So I know that it's being laced in all sorts of things. Since I've been in recovery, I've lost several very close friends to them using another substance, not knowing it was fentanyl, and actually ODing off the fentanyl in whatever they were using.
And then with like the people passing away, did they also have to be hospitalized, or they like died on scene?
So several of the cases they were using crystal meth and didn't know it had fentanyl, and then they were in the hospital. Two of the people that I know that are very close to me were in the hospital brain dead for a couple of days before they actually passed away from the OD on the fentanyl. I know that one of my friends had a seizure off the fentanyl and ended up dying from it.
I remember earlier you mentioned about Narcan and its life-saving measures.
Right.
Do you have more knowledge that you'd like to share about that and like your experiences with it?
So I remember when after I OD'd and I didn't know anything about Narcan except for I had watched a documentary on some people who were doing outreach in an area that was heavily affected by the opiate pandemic, and they would go out with Narcan and search for people who were ODing. And I remember watching a video of this guy ODing and the two outreach workers using Narcan to bring him back, and that was the first time I had ever seen in real life Narcan being used, and how it was able. He was gray when they found him, and they used the Narcan on him, and he came back. So that I have seen it work in real time, and I know that it's what saved me. So I have never had to use it or administer it to anybody personally, but I have seen it be used, and I know it's what saved my life.
If you don't mind sharing, was there like a moment of clarity that made you want to seek recovery?
So I'm going to be honest. I've never been arrested. I've never had any nudge from any organization to get clean. I had a natural desire to get clean. I accidentally stumbled across substance use. I've always known that using drugs was not a good thing, but I also knew that because of my mental health background and because I didn't have any good coping mechanisms, I was suffering from poor belief systems and poor behavioral patterns. I didn't know how to function in life without drugs being my coping mechanism. And the turning point for me seeking recovery was over the years, I had made promises to my family that I would stop using, and I would fall short because I didn't know. I didn't want to use drugs. I just didn't know how to live life. I was a situational user, emotional discord, emotional traumas and things were my triggers. So when I would have an emotional trigger like an argument or something that would stimulate me emotionally, drugs were my course of action because I am a deep feeler. I am really passionate and I'm really tapped in. So I didn't know how to function without using drugs to allow me to not hurt anybody physically. I do have a past of getting in fights and being violent. It kind of comes along with the territory and environment that I lived in. So drugs being my coping mechanism, I just didn't know how to live life without them. But the turning point for me was the day that I promised myself that I wasn't going to use drugs anymore. And then shortly after, I ended up high. and I realized for the first time in my life that I was incapable of stopping using on my own. Before that, I had looked at the stopping, the time that I could get clean, and I based my how addicted I was to drugs based on the fact that I could get a few months clean, I could get a few months away, and then for when I ended up high against my own will, and I realized that I was not capable of stopping on my own. That was the moment that I surrendered, and I remember praying and saying, I really don't understand why I keep using drugs, and I can't do this by myself. And I've learned in hindsight that by me surrendering the fact that I could not stop using on my own, and that I couldn't figure out why I kept getting high, that's when help became available. My story is I prayed, and there was some divine intervention, and a power much greater than myself reached in, and I started to look inward. I started to focus on the using and not the stopping. I started to focus on what would happen right before I used, what would happen during use, what were the things causing me to use, and at this time I had been trying to get clean for some time, so I had some involvement with recovery houses, and I had introduced myself to and sought out recovery, and I was bouncing in and out, still trying to practice abstinence. Wasn't really grasping the idea because there was still a very closed mind. I come from a perpetual cycle of finding ways and using and ways to get more. And along with that comes the closed mindedness that blinds me from really what's going on in my environment because I'm always escaping my reality, so I can never really see the effects of my disease. I can never really connect with the reality of what's going on because I'm always escaping through substance use. And so that moment of clarity when I realized, whoa, I got high and I promised myself I wasn't going to. I knew that I was gonna need help, and I knew that it was something that I could not do by myself. So at that moment I really surrendered, and I became very receptive to the help that was available. I sought out recovery through I learned that I could not recover from substance use without addressing my mental health. So I became very active with my mental health and the recovery from my mental health. I started seeking services for my mental health, along with seeking services for recovery. And I have to address those both hand in hand because what I learned is I use substances to self medicate from the things I was suffering from with my mental health. So when I became receptive and I became open to seeking help, I knew that I had to address those things together. And so my journey started. I remember battling with organizations and help that was available when I was really in active addiction. I wasn't receptive because the disease of addiction keeps me separate from my help. That's what when I'm under the influence, I turn into somebody who I'm not, and I suffer from a way of thinking that keeps me separate from my help, because when I'm under the influence, what the disease wants to do is keep me separate from any help that I can get. So when the opening was made after I surrendered and I realized that I could not do it alone, something shifted inside of me, and I became very receptive, and I started seeking out information, and lo and behold, I found that there's a lot of organizations that are really aware of what is going on out there in the environments where I come from. And seeking out the help, I was able to find the help. And I used several different organizations as all pieces of my puzzle that helped me get clean and stay clean on a daily basis.
Wow, that's very powerful for you to, and I commend you and admire you for, you know, coming into the realization of that welcoming community in, and that it's hard to do this alone, and that you're reminding people out there that there is help out there, and that there are people willing to help. And every step of the way, the journey, there's going to be people in the healthcare system, there's going to be community-based organizations, there's going to be loved ones, churches, faith-based organizations, and multiple people out there who are willing to be part of your journey and help you get through what you mentioned earlier, which is called dual diagnosis disorder. Oftentimes, people who experience substance use disorders, it is in relation to a mental health disorder, and oftentimes people don't want to talk about that, and that's how people have brought up to me, like, they fall back into that cycle,
Right.
and they feel trapped and can't escape because they feel like the substances will be that band-aid for them, and then with that band-aid, and when it wears off, like, you'll just go back to like seeking for another thing that will try to help, but then it's not oftentimes working. So I think like what you've done is just shows a lot of strength and resilience within like your whole journey, 20 plus years of coming to where you are today, and I really admire you for being brave enough to like share with the rest of the world.
Thank you.
Thank you for that. Yeah, and what are some like challenges that you experience in recovery? I know you mentioned earlier about battling with some mental health disorders, and you not realizing that like it is like you using the coping mechanism of using substances like escalated that. Like, what are other challenges, or if you'd like to like expand on that?
Definitely the number one challenge, or several other challenges that I was faced with, is I was born into an environment, a very impoverished environment. My neighborhood around me, the environment around me, was completely riddled with people who suffer from mental health and dysfunction and substance abuse. So one of the main challenges was, I believe today, that if I can't see it, I can't achieve it. So coming from an environment that was completely segregated from the rest of the world, where all the dysfunction was really active and very apparent, misinformation was the number one thing that I suffered from. Not knowing what I didn't know, not having any examples of anything other than what I ended up becoming, which all my role models were addicts. They had been to prison. Even my family members, my parents being addicted, not having any identification, being cut off from opportunities that were present in other people's lives, but not readily available in my community or in my environment. So one of the things that has been really instrumental on me being able to have an active change in my ideas and attitudes, because that's what recovery is. I suffer from a frame of mind and belief systems that kept me trapped in the cycle of using and dysfunction. So what has happened to allow me to recover is I've been presented with new information and identification with other recovering addicts who have been able to stay clean, and I've been able to educate myself on my patterns, on my belief systems, why I thought like I did, why I acted like I did, where the trauma had caused trauma responses. So being able to disconnect from that environment, get away from people, places, and things where I was triggered into survival mode, right? Because in those environments, subconsciously, I'm living in survival mode. And what that looks like is using drugs, using violence, using the things that were going to help me stay alive in the environments that I had to live in, being able to disconnect from those environments and get around people who have better information, who I'm able to identify with, people who have been where I have been, but who have found a new way to live, which I have found a lot of freedom in 12-step programs. That has been a really big instrumental piece of me being able to stay clean, is getting around other recovering addicts who have the information that is necessary, the information that escaped me in the environment. Because when I'm out there, I'm locked and loaded in survival, and any new information is foreign and scary, because I'm locked in this way of life just to survive every day. So being able to identify with other recovering addicts who have been where I've been, who have some new information, who have insight into the disease of addiction, who have insight into the trauma, people who have insight into the fact of what I really always needed was healing and understanding and identification. And I was seeking that through substance use. And the substances became my healing. They became my band-aid. They became my medicine. And so getting around people who taught me how to go inward and look for the trauma and look for the healing and being able to identify that really all I ever needed was healing and understanding and good information. And I needed to, because I was suffering from arrested development. Once I started using, all my mental and emotional maturity stopped. So I'm really living life as a 15-year-old girl having to be in adult situations because the substances had arrested all my maturing, right? So getting around people who understand that I'm coming into the stream of life as a 15-year-old girl with the 15-year-old girl set up mind, and really the only way to grow past that is through learning about how the traumas of my childhood affected me, learning how my mental health affects me, learning that what I need is healing and understanding and education on the way that I was living, learning how my environment that I grew up in really affected me and how I think and how I process information. But until I was able to get out of that and get around more information, people who have had different experiences, I was still going to be trapped in that same vicious way of thinking. So being able to get out of the environments where I had to live in survival mode and get into more conducive environments where recovery, where safe spaces, where recovery was what was happening, where healing was what's happening, where I didn't have to be in defense and in survival mode, where I could let my guard down and let the healing flow in, let new information flow in. So being able to disconnect from those environments where I had to be in survival mode and get in safe places where healing and recovery were happening has been really important, because as long as I'm locked out there in survival mode, I'm going to tend to do the same things because my whole subconscious programming was attuned to keep me alive. And what that looked like was dysfunction, violence, and drug use, where I come from.
And like staying within that environment.
Staying in that environment kept me trapped and kept me isolated from any new information.
And then that, like, you weren't aware of what resources were around you, but now, like, that you actively sought for help, you opened many doors, and you will open many doors for other people listening to your podcast as well.
Thank you so much.
If you don't mind me asking, was there any like stigma that you faced that made you not want to seek recovery?
Absolutely. So coming from the mental health background and coming from a family that was generationally affected by substance use, my father being in prison for a number of years, I always felt that there was a stigma surrounding me. There was a stigma around the mental health diagnosis that I had. I don't mind sharing openly, I had a schizoaffective bipolar type 2 diagnosis that made me feel like I was limited, like the world viewed me in a certain way, that I was incapable of being a productive member of society. I had no education before I sought help and became receptive to the mental health process, and I educated myself on what exactly that meant, and I learned that a lot of it was drug induced, but having the stigma of I never learned how to drive, or I never could get a job, and being on disability all my life, not having the experiences, I felt very limited and very isolated from what I would see, what a healthy life looked like. So there was a lot of stigma, especially coming from the neighborhoods that I went from. I'm a little hood kid from Stockton, and holding that stigma, my appearance was crafted to keep me safe in my environment. So I didn't look like people who were in other areas that weren't associated with where I came from, and feeling like I was always going to be categorized as an abrasive Black person or or an addict or a mental health patient. There was a lot of stigma that kept me isolated from opportunities that I felt internally I didn't qualify for because of where I came from, because of what I looked like, because the color of my skin, because of my diagnosis, because of my financial situation, because of the poverty class I was born into. It made me feel like the opportunities that were available to other people I was not qualified for. And I don't come from a space where I had anybody taking an interest in my life that allowed me to know that even I could qualify for some of these opportunities. I had no guidance, I had no mentor. Everybody who was in charge of taking care of me was living the same lifestyle I was living. So believing that all I would ever be is the little hood kid from Stockton, not knowing that there was resources available, that there was people who understood what was going on in my neighborhood, there was people who understood what was going on in my household. There was these bridges being formed to bridge the gap from the hood into the stream of life, not being able to be aware that there was even these opportunities or these organizations or these groups who understood and were bridging the gap between where I was in that very dark and desolate place to the outside stream of life, never knowing that until that it even existed, you know.
Yeah, I think with like the resources that we have, it's not oftentimes readily available to people, and oftentimes based off of the things that you said, like socioeconomic status, one's race and ethnicity, and people's stereotypes and implicit biases, like people oftentimes like don't seek out for help because others around them have created that narrative that you don't qualify, like you don't belong. But we are here like trying to change that narrative and letting people know that despite your background, like there is help there for you.
Absolutely
And
is.
what we recognize with the opiate epidemic is although everyone is vulnerable to it and susceptible to experiencing an opiate epidemic, opiate addiction, there is our BIPOC community is disproportionately impacted by this opiate epidemic. But oftentimes, like the statistics that we read and that we talked about in the intro episode, that is not accurate at all. And like oftentimes the numbers for our Black and Brown communities, it's underreported. And like we want to shed light into that. We want to break that barrier of our Black and Brown communities for seeking help, and that there's people out there who want to listen to you, who want to make you feel seen, heard, and valued, and loved, and allow you to be part of this community in this safe space. Because like you said, from childhood, you didn't know that these safe spaces and healthy environments where they foster healing and allow you to grieve in a safe space existed. So we want to create that for all generations, and I'm really glad that you were able to step out of that environment and now helping others.
Absolutely.
This day.
Absolutely.
And what is something that you learned to cope with life without using a sorry, let me repeat that. How have you learned to cope with life without using a substance?
So one of the major components of me learning to live life without the use of drugs was being able to educate myself on my own belief systems and my own behavioral patterns, and be able to realize that there was an absence of coping skills and coping mechanisms, because where I come from, healthy coping mechanisms and healthy coping skills were not practiced, talked about, or even anywhere in my environment. So through my journey, I've been able to study and research and learn how to apply healthy coping mechanisms and healthy coping skills to the situations, circumstances, and settings in my life. Because like I said, I was a situational user. I used to change the way that I feel. I used to change my reality. And being able to practice spiritual principles, right? Being introduced to spiritual principles, like humility, acceptance, tolerance, self-love, unconditional love, caring and sharing. Those types of things were never talked about or practiced in my environment, and learning to practice those things for myself, learning how to practice self-acceptance, learning how to be tolerant of myself, learning self-compassion, becoming self-aware, educating myself on my own patterns, my own belief systems, my own behavioral patterns, and being able to apply healthy coping mechanisms and a level of unconditional love for myself has allowed me to not only accept myself, because once I accept myself, I get three possibilities. I can accept it, change it, or eliminate it. But until I am able to accept it, I don't get that freedom. So along the journey of learning about me and having self-compassion and being presented with the opportunity to keep the things that suited me and discard or change or learn new ways of being for the things that didn't suit me, allow me to not only accept myself and live in fluidity and adapt and change freely as situations arise, and allow me to accept people right where they are, allow me to have tolerance for people in my environment, allow me to know that everybody's at different paths and at different places in their journey. And so that all started with me taking a dive into myself has been the answer to my living. Like, I live my life externally finding answers and solutions outside myself, but I've been presented with the information that all the answers to my living problems start and end with me. Taking the dive inside and learning about myself and learning how to change, and learning about the assets that I have, learning how to emphasize my assets to help other people. All that has been how I've been able to get where I'm at.
That's awesome.
Earlier you mentioned that now that you're in recovery, you want to help other people who are stuck in addiction. Do you want to expand on that? How you do that? How that goes?
So absolutely. So my true passion in life is to help the next person who is coming from where I come from with the misinformation. I'm currently in school. I never got to graduate high school, so I'm currently getting my high school diploma. My plans are to go to college and to go into a career, a spiritually based career where I'm helping people identify with mental health, identify with substance abuse, life coaching, those types of things that have been beneficial to me. And so my passion is to give back what I have been able to accomplish, what has been so freely given to me. I just want to be able, I can only keep what I have today. I know this. I can only keep what I have today by giving it away to the next person. I was not gifted this freedom. I was not given this awareness. I was not given this level of freedom and understanding to keep it for myself. The reason I had to go through what I went through and get to the other side is because somebody else is going to need my experience. So that is my passion, using my experience, strength, and hope to help whoever and as many people as I possibly can in any way that looks like. I don't have a clear version of what field I want to go into, or if I even want to charge for my services. I know I want to spend the rest of my life giving back and educating people on the things that I have experience with.
You want to live the rest of your life like instilling hope in
Yes, absolutely.
shedding that light that you received.
Absolutely.
That's beautiful.
Absolutely.
That is beautiful. So I know you mentioned that you were a part of the sober living system. Like, how was that? And what was your experience with that program?
So, like I said, I was homeless before I got into the SLE system. I was homeless for about 3 or 4 years before I got into the SLE system. Early in the recovery process, I was not receptive to the help that was available. So I went into the SLE system with a very closed mind. I relapsed a couple of times while in the SLE system, but when the change occurred, when the active change in my ideas and attitudes occurred, I became very receptive to what the establishments that were having SLEs were actually doing the benefits that they were providing to the demographic of addicts who were seeking recovery. And so I was in the SLE system for about 8 or 9 years. And for the last 2 years, I finally became receptive enough and became an active part of the environment instead of being negative in the environment. I was able to be a assistant manager for the SLE system.
Wow.
For the last 2 years that I was there. The SLE system has taught, when I became receptive, doing chores every day has taught me how, now that I have my own apartment, I've been able to get my own apartment after being homeless for 10 years.
Oh, that's amazing.
Living in the SLE system taught me structure, like how to be home at a certain hour, how to make my bed every day, how to keep my house clean. It helped me stay accountable with random drug testing, which when I became receptive, became my accountability partner. So I knew even when I would have a weak moment, no, you have to test. Your whole life really is standing on, because being homeless added to my addiction. It was the catalyst. When I didn't have nowhere to go and I would have to be outside, or the stress of not having somewhere to live would make me want to use. So when I got into the SLE system and became receptive, knowing that I had to drug test to maintain my housing, became a tool that I was able to use. The last SLE that I was in, I was blessed to have a manager there who was another recovering addict who absolutely took pride in helping the next recovering addict, and we became a very good power team. She was very instrumental in me being able to learn how to be in a place of authority for the first time, learning how uh, uh, how to be in a place of authority and have an open heart and an open mind. She helped teach me how to listen to a situation that goes all the way through without me intervening. So I learned a lot of valuable skills once I became receptive. And transitional living systems, the SLE system, I know now are doing a great service to the community seeking recovery, because a lot of us people who are dealing with active addiction lose our houses, lose our family, and being out there on the streets adds to a catalyst to active use. So finding the stability of having somewhere to wash your clothes, to take a shower, to have a warm bed at night. And then also it taught me to live with a very diverse background of people, because everybody coming into the SLE system is at a different stage in recovery, different degree of sickness. They deal with different things, and learning how to live in a community again, right? Because my disease kept me isolated and in an animalistic state. So entering back into the stream of things, living in a community, I get to learn how to forge relationships. I get to learn conflict resolution. I get to learn how to deal with people from different demographics. I get to learn how to deal with people from different who suffer with different ailments. And when I became receptive to learning, it just what I just learned so indirectly from everything around me, and it was very beneficial. Like I still make my bed every morning, because in the SLE system I had to make my bed every morning. I had a curfew there, so I don't stay out too late at home. I'm used to being home at a certain time. The structure and the programming, and they also promote you going to meetings at 12-step programs, getting building connections with people who are also recovering from the disease of addiction. And a lot of them have rules to where you have to go to so many meetings. So it's like an introduction into another whole community of people who are suffering with the same thing and have the information on how to live lives without the use of drugs. So the SLE system was really beneficial once I became receptive.
And it helped you keep accountable, and also have a safe space to like share your struggles and challenges and how to overcome it within that community. And it sounds like it helped you also create healthy patterns that have now been engraved in you and ingrained in you to this day.
To this day, yes.
And then with the SLE program, did you also do other like recovery treatment stuff like MAT or?
So I did MAT when I started methadone maintenance in 2019, and I was part of the MAT program for about a year, and I was able to successfully graduate the MAT program and get off of methadone assisted treatment, and I was able to start practicing complete abstinence off of the methadone and active heroin and things like that. So some of the counselors at the program that I was in absolutely helped me in my recovery. Having to go see and talk to the methadone counselor, I was able to identify the difference between using substances and using people, places, and things. I was able to start to identify and educate myself on my triggers, what triggered me to use. I was able to identify what my physical body goes through when I'm triggered, how to know when I'm being triggered, and that was one of the first places that I was able to learn and start reading my body. What happens to my body when I have a craving? What happens to my body when I get angry? What happens to my body when drugs are around me, or when I see a straw on the ground, or these types of things? I was able to start to identify and educate myself. So yeah, I stayed with the MAT program for about a year before I was able to graduate.
And that also, like, that level of self-awareness was heightened for you through the counselors and like the therapists and the providers that were there at both of these programs.
Absolutely.
That's awesome.
Absolutely.
Was there anything else you want to share that we didn't get to cover earlier?
So all I want to share is that although I have utilized countless organizations, countless groups, and resources that are readily available, the number one aspect of me being able to get clean and stay clean is an active change in my ideas and attitudes, and a connection to something greater than myself. So I have had a huge spiritual awakening, and knowing that there is a greater scheme to life, and that I am cared for and provided for, and that I'm never alone, never again, has really been able to help me, and to learn how to live life on life's terms through practicing spiritual principles has been a key to me living life without the use of drugs. And I just want to say that no matter where you come from, no matter what you've done, no matter how far down the scale you have gone, recovery is possible, and healing is possible. I suffer from not knowing what I don't know, so seeking out information, getting around new environments, broadening your horizons, educating yourself on yourself, because the problem is within me. The disease of addiction lies within me. The answers to my living problems are already in me. So I just want to encourage you, if you know anybody, or if you yourself are struggling with any type of substance abuse, just know you already have everything that you need to get to the other side of it. It's just a matter of uncovering it, and self-discovery, and learning some new information, and recovery is possible.
Yes, thank you for that. And like Angie said in our first intro episode, knowledge is power, and we want to continue to share the knowledge and not just keep it within ourselves. So that's what we're doing today. And another thing is we want to start having these meaningful, genuine conversations and break the silence surrounding substance use, and initiate open, non-judgmental, genuine conversations with our friends such as Tawna, families, colleagues, loved ones, and any other community members that are willing to share their story. And your words can challenge the stigma and promote understanding and help us shed light to the rest of the world. So thank you so much, Tawna, for joining us today, and so glad to have you in this community and to instill that hope into the rest of the folks that need help out there.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Thanks everyone for
Great.
tuning
Thank
in.
you.